Hey, welcome back, everybody. I'm going to do a short episode today because I'm having lots of people call in and ask about timing advance, the timing light, and all that because we did the 327 deal and set the timing into the cam brake in. So, first of all, let me explain engine timing to you. Now, for some of you, this is not going to be new, but for seems to be kind of a confusing subject. So let's talk about timing. So what timing is, basically when we talk about ignition timing, now there's also camshaft timing, which is a totally separate deal. That's the relationship between when the valve opens and where the piston is. Ignition timing is based on the relationship between the spark plug and where your piston is. So we have a spark plug, and of course we have a wire. The wire goes up to your distributor or your coil pack or whatever. So a signal is sent down the wire and the spark plug, it fires. But obviously when this fires in relationship to where the piston is a big deal. It's called ignition timing. So here's what happens. So the engine, you got your piston here, and we just have an old worn out piston out of a 351 here. So your spark plug is in here, your piston's moving up and down. So we have the four strokes. We have the intake stroke where we pull the air in, and then we compress the mixture. The piston comes back up and compresses the mixture, but here's the dealio. The spark plug fires before the piston actually gets all the way to the top of its travel, or all the way to top dead center. Now, not much before, but a slight amount before, maybe 10, 12 degrees before I actually get to top dead center, the spark plug fires and I ignite my mixture. Now, here's the deal. Here's why that has to happen. So, in order to get full pressure on this piston, in other words, in order to utilize the pressure that's created here to create power, my ignition has to have time to propagate. Or in other words, I have to have time to fully combust and burn that air-fuel mixture so that I can get the maximum amount of pressure on this piston for downforce, which makes power. So we're going to ignite the mixture before we actually get to top dead center, because what the piston's doing is it's coming up to top dead center, the rod is going to cross over the center line, and then it's going to go back down. Well, in order for me to have the maximum amount of pressure on this piston and, of course, exerted on the lever, the rod, and the crank arm, the piston has to be able to absorb that ignition when it is at its fullest potential, or in other words, when it is ignited and creating the most pressure. Now, if the spark plug fires too late, the piston will have already gone through top dead center and started on its way down, and the piston's not going to be here where it needs to be when my ignition is at its fullest pressure. It's going to be down in the cylinder. It's already started down on the other side, and that's going to kill your power. So that's called retarded timing, retarded ignition timing. So it's or late timing. In other words, spark plug fires too late. The piston's already gone past the window where it needs to absorb all that, and I'm not getting full power here, and that's why the engine runs like dog poop if you retard the timing too much. So, okay, so advancing the timing makes the spark plug fire sooner. So the piston has not come up to TDC yet, it's on its way, and boom, I fired that. Now, here's the thing. If I advance the timing too far, that causes all kinds of problems. Not only does it not make enough power, it actually kills your power. It causes pre-ignition and detonation, and it can damage pistons, and it causes all kinds of problems. One of the things I said in the last video is when you do your cam brake in, you want to make sure that your timing is not advanced too far. In other words, I fire this too soon, because now what's happening is my piston's not up where it needs to be, say 10, 12 degrees before it's 20 or 30 degrees down here, the spark plug fires, my ignition propagates, and now what I'm doing, instead of utilizing that ignition as I cross over and put force on this, what I'm doing is I am pushing up that last 20, 30 degrees through not 150 pounds of compression pressure, but 3,500 pounds of pressure, or 4,000 pounds of pressure, depending on, you know, the type of engine you have. So now, boom, this fires. I'm advanced too far. I got all of this pressure, thousands of pounds of pressure. The crank arm down here is not going to stop because it's got all the other pistons. It's rotating. It's going to force this piston up through thousands of pounds of pressure, right? That's going to make the piston head get really hot, and it's also going to do severe damage to the piston head. It's going to cause pre-ignition and detonation, and it's going to start hammering out the piston. It's going to start hammering the rings. So when you have advanced timing or ignition timing that's advanced too far, you're going to hear pinging and detonation in the engine. You're destroying your pistons. So that's why I say one of the things you got to watch is you got to watch your timing. You can't advance your timing too far, otherwise you're going to wreck the motor, especially a new engine during break-in. So we got to have that ignition timing correct. So here's the thing. There's a timing setting. Now, there's two basic types of timing. There's initial timing or base timing, which is when the engine is idling. So this engine is idling. It's running, 900 to 1,000 RPMs, and this thing is just the pistons are going relatively slow. Comparatively speaking, they're really not going slow, but compared to 6,000 RPMs, they're going slow. One thing you have to remember, so I want you to kind of try to wrap your mind around this. Think of an engine turning 6,000 RPMs, okay? So at 6,000 RPMs, that's really not uncommon today. Most engines will do that. A lot of the smaller engines is no problem. So an engine that's turning 6,000 RPMs, the spark plug in every single cylinder on that engine is firing somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 times every second. Try to let that sink in a second. That's how fast this is happening. So my spark plugs at 6,000 RPMs are firing 50 times in 1 second. That means I'm getting intake, compression, power, exhaust. I'm doing the full cycle on every cylinder 50 times per second. That's zinging. So if my timing is off in there anywhere, I'm going to have trouble. It's not going to run right. I'm going to cause damage. So let's explain timing advance. So as you stomp on the throttle on your car, remember we talked about right now the engine's idling, 900 RPMs. At that low RPM, the spark plug usually fires around anywhere from 6 to 12 degrees before top dead center. When we talk about degrees, we're talking about degrees of crankshaft rotation down here. So I'm usually about 6 to 12, depending on the engine, degrees before. So my piston's on its way up. Let's say this one's set for 10. At 10 degrees before I get to the top, I'm coming up here. My spark plug, I've got my air fuel in. My spark plug fires, right? Boom, the flame starts to propagate. I push up that last 10 degrees, but it's not really a big deal because the flame hasn't really had time to propagate fully, so there's not that much pressure. So I cross over the center line with my piston, and now I was coming up here. Now I start going back down. The flame propagation needs to take place in a very small window. In other words, I have to fully combust and put full pressure on that piston before I get to 25 degrees after top dead center. So it fires 10 degrees before, I come up, I hit top dead center, and I start going down. In order to get full potential, I want my flame to fully propagate and put full pressure on that piston no more than 20 to 25 degrees after top dead center when I've started down. And that puts full force on the piston. Okay, so here's the thing. We have two separate systems here. We have a piston and rod assembly moving up and down, and we have a top dead center and a bottom dead center, and we have this chamber. Making sure that that spark ignition is timed to this piston being 10 degrees before and no more than 25 degrees after. I have that window in there. It takes some tuning. You got to get this thing timed right. So the timing can be off. Now a lot of the modern engines, the computer does it for you and it's pretty simple. But if you're dealing with one of these older engines, you know, you got to use a timing light and you kind of got to adjust this yourself. Okay, so why does the timing, no, okay, so now we understand that, right? Now you stomp on the throttle on the car. What does the piston do? It starts going much faster, right? So instead of this at idle, now this thing is just zinging up and down in there. Well, if I'm going faster, think about a couple of airplanes. Let's say you have two jet aircraft and there's a dogfight, right? So I have a jet aircraft coming in this way, and I have another one that's going to cross its path this way. This guy wants to take this guy out, right? So if this guy shoots his ordnance at this other aircraft, let's say it's the Russians, right? So if this guy shoots his ordnance right at that aircraft, guess what? Because this thing is going so fast, let's say this plane's going 1,500 miles an hour, if this guy here shoots right at him, by the time his ordnance gets there, this plane's going to be long gone. He's going to be shooting into the air. So what he needs to do is he needs to, and of course they do it all with computer now, but this guy needs to be way back here, and this guy's ordnance needs to be shot up here, because by the time those shells and ordnance get here, he's going to fly into them, right? So he's going to lead him. He's going to lead that target because it's a moving target. Well, this is a moving target, right? Our ordnance is our spark plug. So this thing is coming up, and now it's zinging way faster. So what has to happen is, instead of the spark plug firing at 10 degrees now before top dead center, it has to fire way sooner. So what happens is the ignition system is set up so that as the RPMs increase, the spark advance or the timing increases or advances. So in other words, now I zing this up to 3,000 RPMs, and the timing, the ignition system is going to advance the timing. So now I'm not firing at 10 degrees before, I'm firing now at 30 degrees before. Because this piston's going so fast, in order to get into the window where I have full pressure on this at top dead center and about 20-25 degrees after, I have to fire the spark plug sooner because the piston's going so much faster, and the flame propagation, the time that it takes the flame to propagate, doesn't really change all that much. It changes a little bit with piston speed because I have more right, I have more air velocity and I'm compressing a lot faster and so forth. But basically, for all intents and purposes, we're going to say that the flame speed and travel really doesn't change all that much. So I have to have time for that flame to propagate. So the piston's going so much faster, I fire the spark plug sooner. By the time I get up to TDC and start moving over into this window where I need to have full flame propagation, the flame is now propagated and I get full pressure on the piston. That's what ignition timing advance is. It advances, or it fires sooner, simply because the piston is going faster, right? It's going to get there quicker, and the flame has to have time to propagate. So I know this is really basic. I hope this makes sense to you guys. And this is why ignition timing advances when you step on the throttle. With a distributor like we're using on this little 327 here, the rotor in the distributor has centrifugal weights in it. And the rotor itself actually changes. It actually moves and advances in there. It has a certain amount of advance built into it. And as the RPMs come up, the centrifugal weights in the distributor cause that rotor to start advancing. So getting that adjusted correctly is important. Now, with a performance cam, what we want to look at is we want to look at total timing. Or in other words, total timing is not this 10, 12 degrees when I'm idling. Total timing is when I zing the RPMs up, how far did my distributor advance my timing, or what's my total amount of timing? It, depending on the engine and the flame speed and the combustion chamber, you know, that's going to affect your total timing. We like to see on street small block Chevys with pump gas, we like to see, depending on the compression ratio, anywhere from 32 to 35 degrees of total advance. Now, what's going to happen with total advance is this. All right, so we've got our timing light here, and the timing light has a lead. And what we do with that lead is, this is in the engine. We take the lead and we hook it up to the #1 spark plug wire, and that gives us our timing signal, right? So if I have this set at 0, that means I'm checking the timing on my timing mark. Okay, so on the front of the motor, we have this timing cover, and there's a mark on it. And of course your balancer, and we've highlighted the mark on the balancer here. Your balancer's in here, right? And your mark's coming around, and this has after top dead center 0, and then retarded, or it has advanced and retarded. So as the mark comes around, every time this comes around, because I have a signal here, the light, the strobe light on the timing light is going to flash, and I'm going to see where this mark is. Well, depending on where my timing is at initial, this mark can fluctuate, right, and it can move in here. So if it's advanced too far, the mark's going to be way up here. If it's retarded, the mark's going to be down here. What I want, if I have my timing light set at 0, so right now my timing is set at 0, for the engine idling or initial, I want to see, and there's a bunch of marks on here, and each mark is 1 degree. So let's say my timing is 6 degrees before top dead center. That's what the book calls for. With my timing light set on 0, I want to see this mark 6 degrees before 0, right? So I'm 6 degrees advanced. If it's way up here, that means it's advanced way too far, and I need to adjust the distributor and bring it down here. So here's the thing though, what happens is, if I have my timing light set for 0, or the base setting, and I rev the engine up, what's going to happen is this timing mark is going to go zoop. It's going to go up here, because what's happening is the timing is advancing. So you can literally take your timing light, put the strobe down on there and be watching it, and while you're watching it, if you take and you zing the throttle up, you can literally see this mark take off this way, because the ignition system is advancing the timing. Well, what I can do though is I can check total timing, because what you need is a timing light with a degree meter. Now, what happens here is this. If I take my degree meter on my timing light and I say, you know what, I want to know what my total timing is, or I want to know how many degrees my timing is advancing. So when I rev this engine up to 3,000 RPMs, I want to know, am I at 30 degrees, am I at 40 degrees, am I at 20 degrees, where am I? Because, like I said, we like to see between 30 and 35 degrees. On a small block Chevy like this, if you get up to 40, 45, 50 degrees of total timing, number one, the engine is going to start losing power, and you're going to start doing damage to your engine. This is why it's so important to check this, especially during initial break-in. So what I can do is I just take my timing, and I have up and down arrows here, and I say, I'm going to go up. I want to run this thing at about 30 degrees, no more than 30 degrees, just for break-in or whatever. I'm just going to say initially I'm going to set it for 30 degrees. So there's 29. So now I've got my timing set for 30 degrees, right? Now I take my timing light, my strobe, and I put it on my timing mark down there. And I'm looking at my timing mark here. And if I have it set for 30 degrees, when the engine is idling, what's going to happen is this mark will come way down here. If I'm just looking at it with it idling, this mark is going to go way down there because I advance the timing light, the strobe on the timing light. But when I rev it up, remember the timing is going to advance. So when I rev it up, what happens is you're going to see this move. It's going to move on up here because the timing is advancing. With my, if I want 30 degrees of total timing, I rev the engine up to 3,000 RPMs and I watch this mark, and my mark will move up here, and what I want is I want that mark right on 0. So if that mark is right on 0 with my timing light set at 30 degrees, that means my total timing is, guess what? It's not 0, it's 30 degrees because I have 30 degrees built into the timing light. And that's basically how this works. I'll try to shoot a video at the end of this. I don't know if I'm going to put it on or not, because one of the problems that I have is the strobe on my timing light. For some reason the camera doesn't like to pick that up. I'd like to show you this thing moving around when I rev the engine up, but you know, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that on camera. I don't know if the camera will pick it up. So hopefully that makes sense. So that's timing. So we're going to set our timing for about 30 to 35 degrees of total advance. Some engines need more. It just depends on the engine. The engine will tell you what it likes. I know like big block Chevys like lots of timing. I did a big block Chevy with big open chamber 781 heads for a guy recently, and we needed like 42 degrees of timing to make that thing run. But that has a much larger chamber and it was pretty low compression. So it just depends on the engine. Less efficient chambers, larger chambers generally need more timing because the flame speed is slower. So it just depends on what you're doing. All right, so that's basically it for the timing. Hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions, make sure that you ask below, and we'll see what we can do with that. So I don't know if you're going to be able to hear me. I'll try to talk loud. Right now we're at initial timing. You can see we're at 800 RPM. And I'll switch over to my strobe light. It's right at about 10 degrees. Now I want you to watch this when I advance it. Now we'll take and we'll advance our timing light to 30 degrees. Now you'll be able to see what that did with our timing mark here. Fire it back up. Down there. Watch what happens when I advance it.
timing light for 30 degrees, that mark coming way down here. When I rev it up and the timing advances, we can see our mark moving up, and you can see the mark up there, and it moves up right to about 0. So with this mark, when I have 30 degrees on my timing light, once I rev it up, this mark should come up to 0. Now if I come up to 0 with my mark here, and my timing light set is set for 30, I'm not at 0. That means I'm at 30 degrees because I've built 30 degrees of advance into the timing light. So hopefully this makes sense. I mean, it's really not that hard of a concept. It's just a little bit hard to show it on the engine with the light strobing and all that. I hope you're getting this. I know this is a little bit involved, this video, but I had a bunch of questions on Facebook of people. You know, I kind of touched on the timing light when I did the 327 cam break-in, and I had probably 10 people on Facebook say, can you please show us how to use that timing light, and even a couple of people on YouTube were asking that question. So there you have it. If you have any questions, I'll try to clarify, try to ask. I did the best I could. It's a little bit difficult to like actually explain this and hold the camera at the same time. So I appreciate you watching. Make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel, My Vintage Iron 7512, and also support this channel, www.patreon.com. I'll put the address in here. If you want to pledge $1, $5, $10 a month, I'm looking for monthly supporters so we can do some really cool builds in the future. So go to my Patreon site. Support me. I really appreciate it. I'm not asking for a lot of money, but I do need some monthly support. Engine building is expensive, and so I'm hoping that I can get a bunch of you on board. For those of you that already have pledged, the patrons that I have, thank you so much. You don't know how much that means. I really do appreciate you. If we get to our certain levels, we're going to be giving away cylinder heads. We're going to be giving away a toolbox, all kinds of stuff coming up, but I got to have the subscribers to do it. So I appreciate you watching. I will talk to you very soon, I promise. Helps if you hook the ignition up. And I think I just ran out of gas. Yay.